The whistle of the train pierced the spring air as it pulled into Cottonwood Springs, a dusty settlement tucked between the rolling hills of Wyoming territory. May of 1875 had brought an unusual amount of rain, turning the typically parched earth into a palette of wildflowers and green grass. Margaret Dawson clutched her small carpetbag tighter as she peered anxiously through the train window, searching for the face of the man she had agreed to marry through a 6-month correspondence. The platform bustled with activity as Margaret descended the train steps, her simple brown traveling dress hanging loosely on her slender frame. Her hair, a mousy shade of brown, was pulled back in a practical bun, not a single curl left to frame her unremarkable features. She had been honest in the description she had sent to Alfred Jennings, the store owner who had placed an advertisement seeking a bride. She had mentioned her plain appearance, her skills as a seamstress, and her willingness to work hard. What she hadn't mentioned was the desperation that had driven her to leave Boston after her parents' deaths left her with mounting debts and few prospects. Margaret's eyes scanned the crowd, finally settling on a well-dressed man whose expression shifted from expectation to visible disappointment as she approached him. "Mr. Jennings," she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Margaret Dawson." The man looked at her hand but didn't take it. "You're Margaret." His voice held no warmth. "You're not. I was expecting someone more." He cleared his throat. "Your letters suggested a different sort of woman." Margaret's cheeks burned with humiliation. "I believe I was quite honest about my appearance, sir." "Honest or not, this won't do," Alfred Jennings said curtly. "I'm a businessman with a position to maintain in this town. I need a wife who will enhance my standing, not—" He gestured vaguely at her. "I'll have my driver take you back to the station. The eastbound train leaves tomorrow morning." As Alfred turned to leave, Margaret stood frozen in place, the weight of her situation crushing down on her. She had spent her last dollars on the train ticket west. There was nothing and no one waiting for her back east. "Excuse me," a deep voice called out, causing Alfred to pause. "Is there a problem here?" Margaret turned to see a tall man approaching. Dust covered his clothes, and his worn leather boots had clearly seen many miles. Despite the trail-worn appearance, there was something striking about him, perhaps the confident way he carried himself, or the intensity in his blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat. "This doesn't concern you, Brock," Alfred said stiffly. "Seems to me like it might," the man called Brock replied, coming to stand beside Margaret. "You're leaving this lady stranded at the station. She misrepresented herself in her letters," Alfred said defensively. "I did no such thing," Margaret interjected, finding her voice. "I told you I was plain. I told you I was practical." "You said you were suitable," Alfred countered. "And you decided she isn't because she doesn't meet your idea of pretty?" Brock asked, his voice deceptively calm. "That's mighty shallow thinking for a man claiming to want a life partner." Alfred's face reddened. "Mind your own business, Yates. Some of us have standards." "And some of us have decency," Brock replied. He turned to Margaret, removing his hat. "Brock Yates, madam, ranch foreman at the Triple Creek." He offered his hand. "I apologize for the welcome you've received to our town." Margaret hesitantly placed her hand in his much larger one. To her surprise, Brock gave her a warm smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Yates, but I—" Margaret faltered, unsure what to say. Her carefully laid plans had crumbled in an instant. Brock seemed to understand her predicament. "Mrs. Sullivan runs the boarding house in town. She's always looking for help with sewing and such. I'd be happy to introduce you if you'd like." Before Margaret could respond, Alfred Jennings cut in. "The town doesn't need another seamstress. She should return east." Brock's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "I believe the lady can decide for herself what she wants to do." He turned back to Margaret. "What do you say, Miss Dawson? Would you like to at least see our little town before deciding?" Margaret looked between the two men, Alfred with his fine clothes and disdainful expression, and Brock with his weathered face and kind eyes. The decision was surprisingly easy. "I would appreciate that very much, Mr. Yates." Brock smiled again and offered his arm. "Then let's not waste any more time here." As they walked away, Margaret could feel Alfred's glare on her back, but she held her head high. She had traveled too far to turn back now. "I'm sorry about that," Brock said as they moved toward a wagon at the end of the platform. "Alfred Jennings thinks quite highly of himself." "I should have known better than to agree to such an arrangement," Margaret admitted, "but circumstances in Boston left me with few options." Brock helped her up onto the wagon seat. "Life has a way of backing folks into corners sometimes. No shame in looking for a way out." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "The question is, what will you do now?" Margaret looked out at the small western town spread before her. It wasn't what she had imagined, but perhaps there was opportunity here still. "I suppose I'll have to find work. I'm a skilled seamstress and I can cook and keep accounts." "Useful skills out here," Brock nodded, "and Mrs. Sullivan is a good woman. She'll give you a fair chance if you're willing to work." As they rode down the main street, Margaret took in the wooden buildings, the general store, the saloon, and the small church at the far end. Cottonwood Springs was nothing like Boston, but there was something appealing about its straightforward nature. "How long have you lived here, Mr. Yates?" she asked. "Going on 8 years now. Came out after the war looking for a fresh start." He glanced at her. "And please call me Brock." "Then you must call me Margaret." The boarding house was a 2-story structure with a wide porch and clean windows. Mrs. Sullivan, a robust woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense manner, listened to Margaret's situation without interruption. "Can you really sew, girl? Not just pretty samplers, but work that holds up?" she asked finally. "Yes, madam. I apprenticed with a dressmaker in Boston for 3 years before my parents fell ill." Mrs. Sullivan nodded. "I've got a room you can have in exchange for helping with the mending and some cooking. If your work is good enough, I can put the word out that we've got a proper seamstress in town. Heaven knows the women here could use one." Relief washed over Margaret. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm very grateful." "Don't thank me yet. It's hard work and I expect it done right." She gave Brock a curious look. "Interesting that you're the one bringing her here, Yates." Brock shifted slightly. "Just being neighborly, Mrs. Sullivan." "Hum," the older woman replied, clearly unconvinced. "Well, come on then, Margaret. I'll show you your room." As Margaret gathered her bag to follow Mrs. Sullivan, she turned back to Brock. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mr. Yates Brock. I won't forget it." "It was nothing," he replied, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll check in on you in a few days if that's all right." "Make sure you're settling in." Margaret nodded, a small smile lifting the corners of her mouth. "I'd like that." In the days that followed, Margaret threw herself into work at the boarding house. Mrs. Sullivan was demanding but fair, and the simple tasks of cooking and cleaning gave Margaret time to adjust to her new surroundings. Word quickly spread about her skill with a needle, and soon women were bringing her garments to alter and fabric for new dresses. True to his word, Brock visited 3 days after her arrival, looking slightly less trail-worn but no less imposing. "How are you faring?" he asked as they sat on the porch after the evening meal. "Better than I expected," Margaret admitted. "The people here are direct, but most have been kind." "Most?" Brock raised an eyebrow. Margaret sighed. "I've seen Mr. Jennings in town. He makes a point of looking the other way." "Alfred's pride was wounded. He'll get over it," Brock said dismissively. "And the Triple Creek Ranch, is it far from town?" "About an hour's ride." "It's good land. Runs along the creek with plenty of water even in dry years." There was pride in his voice. "The owner, Mr. Carson, is getting on in years. His son was supposed to take over, but he went east for school and never came back." "So you run it for him?" Brock nodded. "Going on 5 years now. It's good work." They fell into an easy conversation as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Margaret found herself relaxing in Brock's company in a way she hadn't with anyone in a long time. There was something reassuring about his straightforward manner. As weeks passed, Brock's visits became more frequent. He would bring news from the ranch or small gifts, a jar of honey from a neighbor's hives, wildflowers that grew along the creek. Margaret found herself looking forward to seeing him, her heart beating a little faster whenever his wagon appeared. Summer arrived, turning the landscape golden under the Wyoming sun. Margaret's business was thriving, and she had moved from the boarding house to a small room behind the general store, which she had converted into a modest shop. Her plain appearance, which had been such a liability in Boston society and with Alfred Jennings, seemed to matter less here where practical skills were valued above all. One warm evening in July, Brock arrived at her shop just as she was closing up. "I have a proposition for you," he said without preamble. Margaret's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of proposition? The Independence Day celebration is coming up. There's always a dance in the evening." He cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you'd allow me to escort you." A slow smile spread across Margaret's face. "I'd be honored, Brock." The day of the celebration dawned clear and bright. Margaret had made herself a new dress for the occasion, nothing fancy by Boston standards, but the blue fabric complimented her eyes, and she had allowed herself a bit of lace at the collar and cuffs. When Brock arrived to collect her, he stopped short at the sight of her. "You look beautiful, Margaret," he said simply. Margaret felt a blush creep into her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." And he did. His usually dusty clothes had been replaced with a clean shirt and vest, his dark hair neatly combed. He still looked every inch the cowboy, but a polished version. The town square had been transformed for the celebration. Lanterns hung from trees, tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family, and a band was setting up on a makeshift stage. As they walked among the townspeople, Margaret was greeted warmly by many who had become her customers and friends. Even Alfred Jennings was there with a woman who had arrived on the stage from Denver the previous week, a blonde with elaborate curls and a fashionable dress. He nodded stiffly when they passed. "Looks like Alfred found what he was looking for," Brock commented. "Yes, it seems so," Margaret replied, surprised to find she felt nothing but mild relief at the sight. As the band began to play, Brock led her to the dance floor. "I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer," he admitted. "That's all right. I'm not either," Margaret laughed. "We can be awkward together." Despite their claims, they moved well together, finding a rhythm that suited them. As the evening progressed, Margaret found herself drawn closer to Brock, until her head was nearly resting on his shoulder. "I'm glad Alfred rejected you at that train station," Brock said quietly, his breath warm against her hair. Margaret pulled back slightly to look at him. "Are you?" "Very glad," he confirmed, his blue eyes serious. "The moment I saw you standing there, something told me I needed to know you." Margaret's heart raced. "I'm glad too, though it didn't feel that way at the time." Later, as they walked back to her shop under a sky filled with stars, Brock took her hand. "Margaret, I'm not a man of many words, but I want you to know that these past months have been the happiest I can remember." "They've been special for me too," she admitted. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I care for you, Margaret, deeply." "And I care for you, Brock." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, almost questioning, but when Margaret responded, it deepened into something more certain. When they finally broke apart, Brock smiled down at her. "I'll call on you tomorrow," Margaret nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As summer gave way to fall, their courtship progressed steadily. Brock would come to town whenever his duties at the ranch allowed, and occasionally Margaret would ride out to Triple Creek, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Sullivan. They spoke of their pasts, Margaret's sheltered life in Boston, and the hardship of caring for her ailing parents, Brock's difficult childhood in Missouri, and his experiences during the war. It was during one such visit to the ranch in late September that Brock took Margaret on a ride to a hilltop overlooking the property. The aspens were turning golden, creating a striking contrast against the deep green of the pines. "It's beautiful," Margaret breathed, taking in the vista. "I've always thought so," Brock agreed. "Mr. Carson told me yesterday that he's decided to sell the ranch." Margaret turned to him in surprise. "What? But you've put so much into it." "That's the thing," Brock said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "He's offering to sell it to me first. Said I've earned the right after all these years." "Brock, that's wonderful. Can you afford it?" "I've saved almost everything I've earned. It would take all of it for the down payment and I'd be in debt for years, but—" He took her hands in his. "I think it would be worth it. With the right partner." Margaret's breath caught. "Partner?" Brock dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Margaret Dawson, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I know what I feel. I love you, your kindness, your determination, your honesty. I love the way you've made a place for yourself here through sheer will and hard work." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring with a modest pearl. "Would you consider becoming my wife and building a life with me on this land?" Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "Yes, Brock. Yes, I would be honored to be your wife." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Margaret thought of that day at the train station, how devastated she had felt when Alfred rejected her. Now she could almost thank him for it. "What are you smiling about?" Brock asked as he rose to his feet. "Just thinking about how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best ones," she replied, reaching up to touch his face. "I came west looking for security and found love instead. And I wasn't looking for anything at all until I saw you standing there on that platform," Brock said, drawing her close. "Funny how life works out." They were married on a crisp November day in the small church in Cottonwood Springs. Margaret wore a dress of ivory silk that she had crafted herself, with Mrs. Sullivan, and several customers insisting on adding beadwork and embroidery as their wedding gift. Brock, standing tall beside the preacher, looked at her with such admiration that for the first time in her life, Margaret felt truly beautiful. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward. Even Alfred Jennings and his new wife, Clara, offered stilted congratulations. "I wish you both well," Alfred said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Thank you, Alfred," Margaret replied sincerely. "I hope you and Clara will be very happy." As Alfred moved away, Brock leaned down to whisper, "That was generous of you." "Life's too short for grudges," Margaret said with a smile. "Besides, if he hadn't rejected me, I wouldn't be Mrs. Yates today." Their first year at Triple Creek was challenging. The work was endless fences to mend, cattle to tend, a house to maintain. But they tackled it together, finding a rhythm that suited them. Margaret's practical nature and Brock's experience made them an effective team. By their first anniversary, they had paid off more of the debt than they had expected, thanks in part to Margaret continuing her sewing business from the ranch. Women would ride out to have dresses fitted or drop off mending when they came to town, and Margaret found she enjoyed the company. It was during that same month that Margaret shared news that would change their lives again. "Brock," she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, I need to tell you something." He turned to her, concern crossing his features. "Is everything all right?" Margaret took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Everything is wonderful. We're going to have a baby." The look of joy that spread across Brock's face was something Margaret knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Margaret's body changed, softening and rounding in ways that she found surprising but not unwelcome. Brock seemed to find her more beautiful than ever, his hands and eyes constantly drawn to the evidence of their growing child. In late July, just as the summer heat was at its most intense, their daughter arrived after a long but uncomplicated labor. They named her Hannah after Brock's grandmother. "She's perfect," Brock said, cradling the tiny bundle with awe. "Look what we made, Margaret." Margaret, exhausted but exhilarated, watched her husband and daughter with a heart so full it felt like it might burst. "She's going to have your eyes, I think. And your determination," Brock added with a smile. "Poor thing won't know what hit her." As Hannah grew, so did the ranch. By her third birthday, they had expanded their herd significantly and hired 2 full-time hands to help with the work. Margaret's sewing business continued to thrive, though she was more selective about the job she took, preferring to spend time with her daughter. On the 5th anniversary of their meeting, Brock surprised Margaret with a trip back to the train station where they had first met. "Why are we here?" she asked, confused. Brock took her hands in his. "5 years ago today, I saw a woman standing alone on this platform, head held high despite having just been humiliated. I thought she was the bravest person I'd ever seen." Margaret's eyes softened with memory. "I was terrified, not brave." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Brock said. "You could have gone back east, but you chose to stay and make a life here. Our life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I wanted to give you this to mark the occasion." Inside was a delicate gold locket. When Margaret opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Hannah on one side and Brock on the other. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "So are you," Brock said, his voice husky with emotion. "Not just to me, though certainly to me, but to everyone who has come to know you." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Alfred Jennings was a fool who couldn't see past the end of his nose." Margaret laughed through her tears. "Best mistake he ever made." "Best luck I ever had," Brock countered, drawing her close. "I love you, Margaret Yates." Plain or fancy, in sickness and health, through all the seasons of our life together. "And I love you, Brock Yates. Thank you for taking my hand that day." As they stood on the platform where their journey together had begun, Margaret reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking security and found so much more love, family, purpose, and a place where her true worth was recognized. The train whistle sounded in the distance, a familiar call that no longer filled her with anxiety but rather a sense of contentment. This station, this town, this life, it had all become home in a way Boston never had been. Brock's arm settled around her waist as they watched the train approach. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Yates?" Margaret leaned into his solid warmth. "I am indeed, Mr. Yates." As they walked away from the station, hand in hand just as they had 5 years earlier, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that being rejected at this very spot had been the best thing that could have happened to her. For in that moment of despair, she had found her true beginning. And every day since, through hard work and tender moments, through the birth of their daughter and the growth of their ranch, through arguments resolved and challenges overcome, they had been writing their love story together, a story far richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined on that fateful day when a kind cowboy took her hand and smiled.